Chapter 9. Hygiene, Quarantine, and Sanitation. Definition of purity. Sanitation. Command the children of Israel that they put out of the camp every leper, everyone who has a discharge, and whoever becomes defiled by a corpse. In this way you will separate the people of Israel from their uncleanness, so that they will not die in a state of uncleanness for defiling my dwelling, which is there with them. You shall put out both male and female. You shall put them outside the camp, that they may not defile their camps in the midst of which I dwell. Whatever the unclean person touches shall be unclean, and the person who touches it shall be unclean until evening. Also you shall have a place outside the camp, where you may go out, for a latrine. You shall have an implement among your equipment, and when you sit down outside, you shall dig with it in turn and cover your refuse. For Yahovah your Elohim walks in the midst of your camp, to deliver you and give your enemies over to you. Therefore your camp shall be holy, that he may see no unclean thing among you, and turn away from you. Discharge from the body. When any man has a discharge from his body, his discharge is unclean, and this shall be his uncleanness in regard to his discharge, whether his body runs with his discharge, or his body is stopped up by his discharge. It is his uncleanness. Every bed on which the one who has the discharge lies is unclean, and everything on which he sits shall be unclean. Whoever touches that person's bed shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. Whoever sits on anything on which he who has the discharge has sat shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. And he who touches the body of him who has the discharge shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. If he who has the discharge spits on him who is clean, then he shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Any saddle on which he who has the discharge rides shall be unclean. Whoever touches anything that has been under him shall be unclean until evening, and he who carries those things shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until evening. Whomever he who has the discharge touches without rinsing his hands in water shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until evening. Any clay pot touched by the man with the discharge must be broken, and every wooden utensil he touches must be rinsed with water. And when he who has a discharge is cleansed of his discharge, then he shall count for himself 7 days for his cleansing, wash his clothes, and bathe his body in running water. Then he shall be clean. Emission of semen. Whenever a man has an emission of semen, he must wash his entire body, and be unclean until evening. And every garment and every skin on which the sperm comes shall be washed with water, and be unclean until evening. When a woman lies with a man, and there is an emission of semen, they shall bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. And the priest, Kohen, answered David, I don't have any regular bread. However, there is consecrated bread, but only if the guards have abstained from women. He said to the people, Prepare for the 3rd day, Don't approach a woman. Abstain from having sexual intercourse. These are the ones who were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Menstrual period. If a woman has a discharge, menstrual period, and the discharge from her body is blood, she shall be set apart 7 days, and whoever touches her shall be unclean until evening. And if a woman has an issue of blood for many days, not during the time of her separation, or if she has a discharge beyond the time of her regular impurity, all the days of the issue of her uncleanness she shall be as in the days of her impurity. She shall be unclean. When the woman's menstrual discharge stops, she must count off a period of 7 days. After that, she shall be clean. Also, you shall not have intercourse with a woman during her menstrual period, when she is unclean. If a man lies with a woman during her sickness and uncovers her nakedness, he has exposed her flow, and she has uncovered the flow of her blood. Both of them shall be cut off from their people. Marriage is honorable among all, and the bed undefiled, kept undishonored. Everything that she lies on during her impurity shall be unclean. Also, everything that she sits on shall be unclean. Whoever touches her bed shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. And whoever touches anything that she sat on shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. If anything is on her bed or on anything on which she sits, when he touches it, he shall be unclean until evening. And if any man lies with her at all, so that her impurity is on him, he shall be unclean 7 days, and every bed on which he lies shall be unclean. Giving birth. If a woman has conceived and borne a male child, then she shall be unclean 7 days. As in the days of her customary impurity, she shall be unclean. Then the woman must wait for 33 days, until the time of her purification from the blood of childbirth is completed. In the first week was Adam created, and the rib, his wife. In the second week, he, YHWH, showed her unto him. And for this reason the commandment was given to keep in their defilement, for a male 7 days, and for a female twice 7 days. And after Adam had completed 40 days, 7 plus 33 equals 40, in the land where he had been created, we brought him into the Garden of Eden to till and keep it. And for this reason the commandment is written on the heavenly tablets in regard to her that gives birth. If she bears a male, she shall remain in her uncleanness 7 days, according to the first week of days. In 33 days shall she remain in the blood of her purifying. And she shall not touch any hallowed thing, nor enter into the sanctuary, until she accomplishes these days which are enjoined in the case of a male child. When the time came for their purification according to the Torah, they took him up to Jerusalem to present him to YHWH. But if she bears a female child, then she shall be unclean 2 weeks, as in her customary impurity, and she shall continue in the blood of her purification 66 days. But his wife they brought in on the 80th day, after 80 days, and after this she entered into the Garden of Eden. But in the case of a female child, she shall remain in her uncleanness 2 weeks of days, 14 days, according to the first 2 weeks, and 66 days in the blood of her purification, and they will be in all 80 days. Body of the dead man. When a man dies in a tent, all who come into the tent and all who are in the tent shall be unclean 7 days. And every open vessel in the tent, which has no covering fastened upon it, is unclean. And whoever in the open field touches one who is slain with a sword, or a dead body, or a bone of a dead man, or a grave, shall be unclean for 7 days. Carcass of the unclean insect. Whoever touches the carcass of them, unclean insects, shall be unclean until the evening. And whoever carries any part of their carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. Carcass of any animal and unclean four-footed beast. If any animal of which you may eat dies, unslaughtered, he who touches its carcass shall be unclean until the evening. And all that go on their paws, among all kinds of four-footed beasts, are unclean to you. Whoever touches their carcass shall be unclean until the evening. And he who carries their unclean four-footed beast's carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. And he who eats of its carcass ignorantly, any part of their carcass falls on it, shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. He also who carries its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. And every person who eats what died naturally, what dies of itself, or what was torn by beasts, whether he is a native of your own country or a stranger, he shall both wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Then he shall be clean. But if he does not wash them or bathe his body, then he shall bear his own iniquity. Carcass of the creeping things. These are unclean to you among all that creep. Whoever touches them when they are dead shall be unclean until the evening. And upon whatever they, unclean creeping things, may fall when they are dead, it shall be unclean, whether it is an article of wood, or clothing, or skin, bottle, or sack, any vessel in which work is done. It must be put in water, and it shall be unclean until the evening, so it shall be cleansed. And every earthen vessel, a clay pot, into which any of these unclean creeping things falls, whatever may be in it shall be unclean, and you shall break the vessel. Of all the food in one of these unclean vessels, which may be eaten, that on which such water comes shall be unclean, and all drink that may be drunk from every such vessel shall be unclean. And everything upon which any part of their carcass, unclean, falls shall be unclean, whether an oven, or pan with a lid, or hearth for pots. It shall be broken in pieces. They are unclean, and shall be unclean to you. Nevertheless, a fountain, a spring, or pit wherein there is plenty of water remains clean, but whoever touches their carcass, unclean, shall be unclean. If a part of their carcass falls on seed which is to be sown, it shall be clean. But if any water be put on the seed and any part of their carcass, unclean, falls on it, it shall be unclean to you.